All right, well, Manso and Clay Ferraro, your Miami Sports Pod. Clay, the doldrums of summer are finally over because football starts this week. And I saw a video, I think it was on Sunday, of the Bills reporting to camp, and I actually got excited to see football, like training camp. And it's funny because midway through the summer, I was kind of like, I don't really miss football. It'll get here when it gets here. I'm fine. But now that it's almost here, like I'm actually excited. The Dolphins football's back on Wednesday. They report to camp. They get to practice. But I mean, just the fact that it's back is exciting.
Well, that's because you just got back from London and you saw what they call football. And then you came back here. And you couldn't wait to get back to our version of football.
I want my real football. I don't want football. I want football. No, it's good. So look, the Dolphins get to work on Wednesday. And it is interesting how the offseason works because in the old days, you had the end of the season. And if your team didn't make the playoffs, it was like, oh my gosh, the draft would come. It was fine. You'd get your draft in and you'd see your team in July and August. But now because of all these mini camps and OTAs and all these training sessions, we've seen a lot of the Dolphins this offseason. Just, now we're going to see the start of training camp. So as we enter a camp, Clay, what is it that you look forward to most? Obviously, the storyline of Tua Tagovailoa is one that nationally is looked at. But what are you looking at as far as what starting Wednesday until the start of the season you want to see from the Dolphins and learn about the Dolphins?
What funny things is Mike McDaniel going to say? I mean, that's I think what I'm and I'm saying that
segment.
I say that jokingly, and yet, well, I think you and I, you've done this longer than I have, but we've both done this for a while now, and you start to learn that, yeah, man, it's so exciting to be out there for training camp, and it's great to see the guys and see the chemistry that they're building and stuff like that. But the daily, Tua threw 3 interceptions today, let's lose our minds over it means absolutely nothing. And so I'm not looking forward to the overreactions when we write down, Tua was picked off by Xavier Howard. And especially when you're learning a new system. And yes, they installed much of this back during OTAs and minicamp. But now that you're putting this thing into motion, I expect mistakes. And I expect a lot of mistakes. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And look, let's put it this way. If Tua were going out there and going 25 for 25 every day and throwing 12 touchdown passes, I'd be really worried about the defense. So I'm not looking forward to the overreactions in particular to what we see Tua do. What I am looking forward to is just see how this whole thing comes together. And it'll be exciting to see what everybody's like on day one and the first week and all that. But more so, what's the progress like? And then what does it look like in the first preseason game? And then most importantly, what it looks like when week 1 rolls around.
The funny thing is, Tua, and we will talk obviously about Tua in a moment, and we're going to talk about Tua a lot. Any podcast we do about the Dolphins the rest of the way, we're going to talk about Tua. He's the starting quarterback for this team. Every city, every NFL town, they talk about their quarterback. I mean, that's the way it works. And if your team's having success, what's the quarterback doing right? And if your team isn't, what's the quarterback doing wrong? I mean, it's part of having that job. So we'll certainly talk plenty of Tua, but I'll be honest with you, the answer to the question about, what to look for at camp is, I'm curious how Mike McDaniel runs a football team. Mm-hmm. And everybody is different. When Brian Flores took the job, and God knows, you mentioned we've been doing this a long time. We have, and covered the Dolphins for 20 plus years. There have been a lot of coaches. There have been a lot of changes. There have been a lot of styles, and you had the positive coaches, and you had the coaches that were like, about the on time and getting, and then you had Brian Flores, who was a kind of a combination of everything, where he was just that tough guy, but he was supposed to be a player's coach. It turned out maybe he wasn't. Mike McDaniel looks like the ultimate player's coach in the sense that, he's young, he's hip, he's fun, he's progressive in his thoughts about football and what he expects. He is also cerebral and analytical about things. All of that is great, and we've discussed it plenty. But how does he coach a football team is something we don't know yet. And the rigors of training camp, and then when you start playing preseason games and there's injuries and position battles and big decisions, those are things that I'm really curious to see from Mike McDaniel, because I think you'll agree with me, Clay. The reviews have been positive on McDaniel. He's a little quirky, a little different. I think there's nothing wrong with saying that. It's not an insult. He's probably a lot different than most coaches. I think you would also agree with that. I think most even Dolphins fans would agree. His tone, the way he speaks, the way he breaks things down, even to us when we ask questions, is different. It's refreshing, but as you know, it's going to come down to wins and losses, and how Mike McDaniel coaches this team to those wins and losses is something that I'm really looking forward to. And quite frankly, I don't have the answer right now of what kind of coach Mike McDaniel is truly going to be, because we've seen this kind of vanilla version of McDaniel, the nice guy who's ready to, lead, and he's saying all the right things, and his players seem to be backing him. But until you get into that daily grind of training camp into the season, we really don't know what the reaction will be and how this team will progress.
Yeah, and what Tyreek Hill said, he's the funniest coach I've ever had. Tua Tagovailoa says that, I've never had a coach that's so positive, that everything is positive with him.
Absolutely positive, yeah.
And yet you can separate these two things, because the thing that really drives me nuts is when you hear, all this funny stuff and all this goodwill, all this laughing, but that's all going to go away after the first loss.
No, I don't think so.
No. Well, but I mean, let's wait. Let's can we we got to go with the.
Why do you want to change him already? Let him be him and see what happens.
And that's the thing. You can separate the two here. Yeah, we can say, the funny stuff isn't going to be as funny anymore when they're losing. Well, guess what? We're not there yet. We can only go based on
food tastes better when you're winning. Everything's better when you're winning.
So I think let's separate the two. Can we enjoy the funny things that he says? Can we enjoy that? And then not have to say in the same breath, but that doesn't mean anything if he loses ball. We know that. Everybody knows that. Nobody's going to think it's funny if they're 2-14. Okay, everybody gets that. Yeah. So what I want to hear, Will, as training camp goes on, I think we're going to hear players talk about him as a player's coach and how funny he is and all this stuff. I want to hear what they're learning. And I want to hear, because I think the thing that struck me when you listen to Mike McDaniel speak is the importance that he puts on the ability to teach. And so with
He's
a lot
a
of
teacher
these players
first. Yeah.
And I think with the head coach, there are two things that are extremely important. Number one, you have to motivate guys, and you have to have them believe in you and trust you, build that trust that leads to the motivation for them to go out there and play. But number two, you got to be able to teach, and they have to trust that when they walk into the building and give you their time, because these guys are extremely busy and this is their livelihood. So if they're going to give you their time, they need to trust that they're going to get something out of that. And that comes by your ability to teach them. So I'm going to enjoy the funny stuff. I'm going to enjoy the joy of training camp and everybody being back. I also think you can separate the two and say, okay, that's fun. What are they learning? And that's what's going to translate ultimately to the wins and losses, which we all agree is what matters.
To your point too on McDaniel, the teacher, look, he is a coach, and coach in theory is a teacher, right? I mean, your job is to teach and lead and by example and to try to get the best for your players. What I found interesting, Clay, about being out there, and again, during the summer, you go out for OTAs. We're invited to a few practices. They're very low key. Obviously, there's no big hitting. This isn't training camp yet, but we saw guys are in shorts. It's a little different. But what I thought the teacher, Mike McDaniel, was clear is if you just watch Mike McDaniel go from player to player, getting down on a knee with a guy, maybe he's catching his breath on the sideline, talking to him about something, pointing out plays, walking over to a specific player on the field after a play and pointing and mentioning things. It's clear that he really is invested in the teaching part of it. He doesn't want to just stand there with a playbook and say, okay, run Z5, flat 43, and be this offensive guru he's supposed to be. He understands that he's not an offensive coordinator anymore. He's a head coach, and that's a big responsibility. And I like that about McDaniel. Again, we could always preface it and say, but if they don't win, who cares? That goes for any coach.
We all get that. We get it. Okay?
We get it.
Everybody gets it. You don't have to say it every time.
Every time. On the surface, I like it. I like what I've seen.
Yeah, people feel like they're somehow smarter by saying, but it doesn't matter if he does. No, we get it. We understand. But guess what? We're not there yet. So let's enjoy the meal while it's being made.
Okay, so that's the Mike McDaniel part. I think it's obvious that you want to see what he's like, and you won't learn day one. Look, I'm going to be out there Wednesday. It's not like I'm going to come back Wednesday night from camp and say, I know exactly what Mike McDaniel is. No, it's going to take time. I don't even think he knows what he is yet. I mean, because he needs to do it. But Clay, we have to get into Tua because obviously that's the big discussion with this team. And you and I could talk about Tua till we're blue in the face. We almost have at this point. We've been covering it now a couple of years. We've seen the progression, and I do think it is a progression in what he's done. He has gotten better. The question is, where does that, where does it end? Where's that ceiling? How much more can he improve? And obviously having Tyreek Hill and Waddle and Mike Gesicki coming back in the fold, there are weapons there. We'll talk about the running backs in a second too, because there are a lot of running backs. I'm not exactly sure what direction they go in there. And obviously that's going to be a part of training camp. But Tua Tagovailoa, I think that's the biggest question for the Dolphins entering is what do we expect from Tua in what quite frankly is a make or break season? And when I look at Tua, Clay, I'll just start by saying this. Tua has said all the right things. I think to this point, I think he's tried to, do all the right things. I think it's clear he understands the pressure that comes with being a quarterback. And what was clear last time we spoke to him, Clay, is that he hears the critics. He hears the silliness about the deep ball and what, the video that went viral and all these things. But almost to your point about McDaniel, I think it's clear that Tua understands that the results are all that going to matter. And in this third season, it really is make or break for him. If he doesn't have a significant improvement, especially with the acquisition of Tyreek Hill, especially with, again, all those running backs they have, you would hope one of them comes through the offensive line, hopefully getting better. Defense, hopefully still being a strong point of this team. The excuses will run out if he doesn't improve. Now, this isn't about the deep ball. This isn't about anything like that. This is just about leading your team and being an accurate, consistent passer and winning games. I think Tua knows this. And if there's anything I've learned about Tua now, Clay, and I think you feel the same in a couple of years, he's not some soft, sweet kid. I think sometimes people point him out because they see this guy, the Hawaiian, this cool dude. Like, he's just a nice guy, good family. No, Tua's got a little toughness in him. And not only that, I think he's kind of got a little attitude to him, which I think it's almost like a chip on his shoulder entering the season where, hey, look, you may want to paint me as this nice guy who smiles and he's so sweet and says all the right things, but Tua understands it's on him this year, and the last thing he wants to do is fail this team and fail himself.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting when you compare the Miami Dolphins to the San Francisco 49ers, because you have a lot of the same elements, right? You're bringing over Mike McDaniel, and he worked, of course, over there with Shanahan, and I think some of McDaniel's success is obviously credited to working with Shanahan. But let's compare the two offensive teams, because I think it's really interesting. You've got an elite tight end in San Francisco in George Kittle. You've got an elite receiving tight end in Mike Gesicki, a guy that has all the tools. Not quite the blocker George Kittle is, but you're talking about having the similar element in the offense and the passing game in particular. You've got a receiver in San Francisco in Deebo Samuel that they use so many different elite receiver. You got guys like Brandon Ayuk that you brought in. You have good receivers that you brought in. Over here, you've got an elite receiver in Tyreek Hill that's going to be used a little bit differently than Deebo Samuel, but the creativity is going to be there. I'm saying all this because I think you've seen a similar group of weapons built around the quarterback. And the guy that I think I would compare Tua's career to up to this point quite favorably, I think it's very similar, is Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think the thing that you noticed in San Francisco was they realized Jimmy Garoppolo's ceiling. And it's what we've seen the last couple of years. And in San Francisco, it's not good enough. With Tua, you've got the opportunity to break through that ceiling and be better than what we've seen from Jimmy Garoppolo. So all this to say, when you're talking about a make or break season for Tua Tagovailoa, I need to see a player that you go out there and you win games because of him. He's not just a player that you win games with because you've got elite weapons around him and you've got a guy who's really good at scheming up offense and getting the ball in the hands of elite playmakers. But when you get to the point where it's 3rd and 8 and you need that first down conversion to either salt away a game or keep that game-winning drive alive, is Tua Tagovailoa the guy who's going to get it for you? Because that's going to be the difference between him and Jimmy Garoppolo, who you saw it last year and you see it it seems like with Jimmy Garoppolo, you'll watch him and you're like, man, he's really good. He's got everything you want. And then he'll make the big mistake. And so with Tua, I think we've seen something similar at times. This has to be the year where, number one, the big plays are there and you've got the weapons to do it. And he didn't have to throw the ball 60 yards down the field to do it. But number two, and most importantly, he's got to erase the big mistakes. He's got to do the thing that Jimmy Garoppolo has not been able to do in his career because San Francisco moved on from him. And if Tua can't do that here, Miami's going to do the same.
Yeah. Especially with a new regime. Look, you got a new head coach. He comes in. Mike McDaniel's going to say all the right things. He's going to look at Tua and say, I want to work with him. I want to help him reach his potential. I want to win with him. But if you don't, you could easily move on from him because that's the way it works for a new coach when you inherit a quarterback, as he did with Tua Tagovailoa. And I thought, McDaniel said something during the OTAs where he said, all this talk about the deep pass and the 60, 70-yard pass. I mean, yeah, sure, Tua could throw it down the field, but if I need Tua Tagovailoa to throw the ball 60 yards down the field to have a successful offense, two things are in play there. Number one is it's not much of an offense where you're just sitting there saying, hey, let's design a play where I need the quarterback to throw it 60 yards down the field. Sure, now and then you're going to throw a deep bomb, but as far as a real consistent part of an offense. And number two is you better have the best offensive line in football, because to have a guy have to go down the field 60 yards, Mahomes will do his crazy stuff and dance around and throw it, fling it. You can't compare yourself to Patrick Mahomes. It's just a different animal. I mean, it's just, you can't. Every quarterback in the NFL, every team wishes their quarterback was Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he's a freak of nature. So for Tua to have success, it's not about can he throw it 60 yards. It's not about how far he can throw it. It's about within the playbook, hitting the plays, calling the right plays, being able to audible, making the quick read and decisions, and getting the ball in a place where those guys with the yak and just get that ball yards after catch, make big plays. And I mentioned some of those names already, but you start with, Hill and Waddle right there. Clay, you said something though that I want to go back to. And I think a couple of years in now to his career, I think we can ask this question fairly. We talk about ceilings and we talk about, comparisons. You mentioned Garoppolo a bit as far as, what they've done in the NFL, as far as, the way they lead a team. What is Tua Tagovailoa's ceiling? I think it's a fair question to ask now. When he came into the league, the question was, can he be a top 10 quarterback? Can he be a superstar quarterback? When you draft a guy at top 5, you should be asking that question. Are we still asking that question? Do we still believe that Tua Tagovailoa can be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL? And realistically, the Dolphins need him to be a top 10 quarterback to have success.
So this is where I love the comparison with Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think the thing with Jimmy Garoppolo is he's had the benefit of being in a system where you've got a really, really good running game. Tua hasn't had that at all.
Nope.
The running game has been atrocious. And I think that in San Francisco, the running game was not because you had elite running backs. Now, you had really, really good backs, but not guys who were like top half of the first round guys that were must draft. No, it's players who fit the system really, really well and played to that system. The guys who were so good, and the offensive line that knew how to run the schemes perfectly. So if you bring that over, right? If you bring over what Mike McDaniel did in San Francisco, just a touch of it to the running game in Miami, and you're able to have a semblance of a running game. And Tua was able to get the ball out on time and hit these guys in stride. No, he doesn't have to throw the ball 60 yards down the field in order to create an explosive play. You asked me about his ceiling, Will. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Garoppolo has already been given every opportunity to hit his ceiling. We know what his ceiling is, and it's not good enough for San Francisco. With Tua, and this is why it's a make or break season, he should have the running game around him now. He has the weapons around. It's not just Jalen Waddle, Gesicki, and then Devontae Parker at 50% because he was injured so often. No, man, you have got legitimate weapons. I think Cedric Wilson is a heck of a pick. You're going to have the guys that we will know to a ceiling by the end of this year. We don't know it yet. By the end of this year, we need to know what it is.
So you don't know it.
No, I don't.
You don't think he could be. You don't know for a fact if he could be a top 10 quarterback.
No, okay.
Like you don't have an inkling. Like as far as
a
feeling.
I don't. And let me say this: I've compared him to Jimmy Garoppolo. Let's bring up the guy that Dolphins fans would love to compare him to, and who Teron Armstead compared him to, Drew Brees. Drew Brees wasn't Drew Brees until he got to New Orleans, and he had Sean Payton, and they drafted Marcus Colston, and they were able to get Jeremy Shockey.
But he did have success in San Diego, though. He had some success that you could see there was a chance there. I don't think Tua's had that level of success to feel that comfortable yet.
No, but Drew Brees went from being like
good top Hall of Famer,
top 10, to top 2 in the NFL. Yeah. To your point about Tua Tagovailoa, I mean, we're talking maybe top 20 to 25, depending on, can he get the top 10?
I would, top 12 would be nice for me. If Tua can take that. And look, the NFL is, and it's funny, you and I were talking about it just a while ago, and it had nothing to do with quarterback play, but quarterback money. We were talking about it off camera, off air, and the way quarterbacks are making money and how Patrick Mahomes' contract looks so different now with all these guys getting money. And you've seen some of the recent moves, including Kyler Murray with his big deal. Tua's not close yet to that top 10 or 12 quarterback. He's just not. And part of it is what you just said. It didn't help that the Dolphins and Brian Flores didn't always commit to him and the pulling back and forth with Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I know that's whole news, but that's part of the growth of Tua and the story of Tua as a quarterback. I think the fact that he hasn't shown the ability to avoid the big mistake is what has also slowed him down. He's not a turnover machine, but his turnovers have been very costly. in some tough moments. And I think that's something he needs to grow from. But you mentioned the running back too. And I think that's a position where, the Dolphins are trying all they can to fix this position, Clay. They're doing all they can. I mean, they are signing guys, they're bringing guys in. And when I look at the running back situation, I always liked Chase Edmonds. I just thought he was a nice player. I thought he was kind of lost in the shuffle out there in Arizona, but I like what he brings to the table. I think, what Raheem Mostert could eventually be when healthy. Here's a guy who's maybe the fastest running back in the league, on top of still having other guys that were here. It's an interesting dynamic. But right now, as we speak, the week of the beginning of training camp, who's the Dolphins' best running back when healthy?
Oh, I no clue. And I think that's okay. I think that's fine, because
I think it's Raheem Mostert when healthy.
I agree.
Think when healthy, but is he going to be healthy to that level?
Right. And I think the thing that we've seen, and this is where I was bringing up the San Francisco comparison, because I think a running game, you can do it two ways. Either you have the elite running back, somebody who can just make you miss, he can run over guys, your Derrick Henry that you just
Dolphins don't have that. They don't have that.
Or you bring in the system and you find guys that can fit into that system really well. And unlike what Brian Flores unfortunately had to deal with or created of his own making year after year, you didn't have a consistent system that was proven when it came to the running game. So you were trying to plug guys in to a completely different system. Whereas you bring up Raheem Mostert, well, where did he succeed? Out in San Francisco. And so he's coming in, he knows the system. He knows what they're going to be doing here. So that's why
his thing is health. His thing is health.
Sure.
With him, it's just health. Yeah.
I have a lot more confidence because this system is proven. I being a Saints guy, I had to watch Kyle Shanahan run it in Atlanta for a long time and did a really good job there. San Francisco gave the Saints fits out there. So I've seen it, I see it work, and I've seen it work with running backs that are not all pro caliber backs because the system is so important. And so if you're bringing that system in, then that creates the ability for Tua to have the quick reads where you're not having the linebackers and the safeties able to key in on the passing game, especially right at the line of scrimmage. It makes such a difference when you have that running game. And so I don't know who their best running back is going to be, but I'm very confident that whoever it is going to be a lot better than what we've seen for the last 3 or 4 years here.
Yeah, I mean, look, Myles Gaskin, Ahmed, all these guys that have done fine. Gaskin's carved out a nice little role for himself, but I think it's Chase Edmonds entering the season. I think Edmonds is the guy that I look to as, he came over as a free agent. He's healthy. He's a guy that, again, he's had some solid success in the year. As you mentioned, the Dolphins don't have a Derrick Henry, but then again, not many teams do. There are very few teams that have just that back that's going to get it 20, 25 times. Teams just aren't built that way anymore. And when you have a unicorn like a Derrick Henry, that's great. And when you look around the league, teams that win don't need that. I mean, the teams that have won the last few Super Bowls, you look at some of the players they had. I mean, look, it usually is by committee. It usually is a guy that whoever gets hot, you roll with that guy. The Dolphins have the potential to be that kind of team. Again, based on the system Mike McDaniel has, there are a lot of likable guys there as far as, I think Edmonds could be good. I think Mostert, when healthy, could be good. You still have Myles Gaskin. You still have people that I think you could trust in that position. Offensive line, obviously, how they block, how they perform is going to be very important. I think overall as a team, though, I think the question Dolphins fans ask themselves is, do they feel better that this is an improved football team? I think in getting Tyreek Hill, you almost have to say to yourself, okay, we got to be better than we were last year. We have one of the most exciting players in the NFL. I mean, if not the most exciting player in the NFL on our team now. And from an offensive perspective, for a team that now brings in an offensive-minded head coach, I think it's fair, and every team goes through this, Clay, but I think it's fair to enter training camp and say to yourself that the Dolphins can be a playoff team. The Dolphins can be a team that has success this year, that wins games, that has a chance. Now, their schedule at times is very tough, and schedules, all that stuff changes. Guys get hurt. Teams that look tough now may not be so tough when you play them. But I think on paper, as a Dolphin fan, I don't think it's bad to you're falling into some sort of trap that this is a good football team. The uncertainty of it is you do have a new head coach. You have a quarterback with a lot of pressure on him in a make or break year. And I think if any of those things deviate, if Mike McDaniel can't handle this and his system isn't, working, put into place quick enough, if Tua struggles, this team can absolutely fall on its face and have a bad season. But I think as it stands now entering camp, there's reason to be optimistic.
Agree relative to the team in a vacuum. Here's the problem. And let me
Okay.
throw this back at you.
Good. What's the problem?
Which of these teams do you think right now you can say confidently Miami is better than?
Okay.
Kansas City.
Mm-mm.
LA Chargers.
Mm-mm.
Denver Broncos with Russell Wilson.
Yeah, Wilson has a whole new dimension to what was a solid team. Now I think they go above solid now with Wilson. Yeah.
Who am I missing? Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Raiders added more pieces. Obviously, getting Devontae Adams is a big deal. I think, when you go through those teams, Clay, and you're right. Those teams are all on paper, but I think adding Tyreek Hill, and you mentioned Cedric Wilson. You mentioned Cedric Wilson earlier. We can't forget he was a nice player in Dallas. Nice piece for them that can make some plays. When you still have Jalen Waddle, who's ascending, when you have those backs we just talked about, it really does come down to how Tua handles that in a new system with McDaniel, what McDaniel puts on Tua's plate. We haven't even talked about defense. I mean, look, defensively, the Dolphins should be a very good football team. Are they going to be an elite defense? I don't think so. But I think when you look at the corners they have, obviously he's having X and, Brian Jones, he got put on the PUP list, but he should be fine. And Jalen Phillips is a guy that was a monster last year. Yep. Dolphins rookie record for sacks. I think you've got to think he's an ascending player that keeps getting better. Christian Wilkins. This is a good defense. They only need to be a above average offense, in my opinion, to be a playoff contender. Average, average or anything below average, and this isn't a playoff team on offense. Anything above average, which is what, top half of the league, you would say, I think the Dolphins are a playoff team. I think
and this
playoff
is contender, and that's where I was going with this thing. I just named the only teams that I just named were in the AFC West, right? Yeah. So I mean, let's say if we haven't
gotten the Buffalo, obviously.
No, I mean Buffalo, New England, the AFC North. Like I mean, Cincinnati, you got to think is
Cincinnati. Joe Burrow's ascending still. Jamar Chase, obviously.
I mean, who knows what Cleveland's going to be? But Baltimore, Pittsburgh, if they can rally around Kenny Pickett, if he ends up being the starter over Trubisky, the AFC South has to get somebody in. Probably Indianapolis. I mean, the AFC is a gauntlet, and compared to the NFC, it's not even close.
No, it's not, but I think Buffalo, KC, I mean, those teams are obviously on a different level. You know what I mean? We saw it last year in the playoffs. If maybe the two best quarterbacks in the league, and then obviously good players and pieces around them. I don't think any Dolphin fan thinks they're at that level yet. But I think Dolphin fans feel that they got into the next tier, right? Like they were kind of like that odd team out last year. I think Dolphin fans feel like they're in that next tier. And I kind of agree with them that they are in that next tier. The next tier of the outside looking in teams, right? Like I think they've gotten out of that tier of outside looking in into inside, now looking at the top teams and saying, okay, how the hell do we catch those teams? How do we get to those Buffaloes and KCs?
I think they can be better than they were last year and still miss the playoffs. And that's the point I'm getting to with this. It's a shame because, man, if they were in the NFC, I would confidently say this team is going to make the playoffs because the NFC is a mess.
What do you mean? The Giants are I can't even say what.
Thank you for proving my point. I mean, that was sorry. But no, I like what I've seen and heard from Mike McDaniel. Yeah, I know we got to wait for the wins and losses. If you lose games, it's not funny anymore, blah, blah, blah. I need to see this team progress, get better, and I need to see Tua take a major step this year. And the record may not necessarily reflect the level of progress. And so maybe it does.
Man, Clay, can you say that one more time? Because that right there is something that makes Dolphin fans' ears burn.
I understand.
And stomach churn.
I understand, but let's say this. I mean, last year they were an over 500 team, and I don't think Tua was very good.
Back-to-back years.
Yeah, but I think this year they could be that, and I could look at it objectively at the end of the year and say, no, you know what? I like what I saw out of him. The defense took a massive step back, and that's why they missed the playoffs, or they had injuries or whatever. And flip that around too, Will. Like, let's say they win, they go 12-5 because this running game is just ridiculously good and shocks us all. And Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are catching 5-yard outs and running 80 yards down the field, but Tua isn't doing anything significant. You can evaluate the quarterback independently of what the team does. And so when we're sitting here talking about what the final record may be if they make the playoffs, I do think that the quarterback play is an enormous part of how well you do. But I think we've seen from San Francisco, Jimmy Garoppolo isn't all that great. They're looking to move on from him. It's still been a very, very good team. So I need to see Tua progress. Maybe the record doesn't reflect it, but I want to have a much better idea, regardless of record, at the end of this season, if Tua is your franchise quarterback.
I think you have to. I think, the funny thing is, Clay, let's end it with this. We're going to talk a lot in the next few weeks. This is just a training camp primer. We haven't even seen these guys on the field yet in camp. That's on Wednesday. But I do think it's safe to say that if there's anything you take away from this, this discussion, and if there's anything you look at this Dolphins season looking forward, is Mike McDaniel's not going to go anywhere. This is his first year. They're going to give him a chance to build the system and to see what he can be as a head coach, even if he has some ups and downs, which he will, even if he struggles, which at times he will. He's a new head coach. There are going to be some ups and downs. For Tua Tagovailoa, though, we kept saying make or break season. I know that's a cliche, but it's the truth. This is the season we have to know. Are you riding with Tua Tagovailoa or not? Because we see the contracts quarterbacks are getting. We see the contracts that quarterbacks are being committed to where teams are saying, that's my guy. I'm going to pay him $40 million a year plus. And with the salary cap continue to rise, that's what you're paying. So if you're going to commit to a quarterback long-term, if Tua's that guy, you got to pay him that kind of money. You need to know right now. You cannot keep piecing together stuff around them, hoping it comes together. And as I mentioned earlier, is on Tua, and I'm sure Tua knows it. He's not a dummy. I'm sure he embraces that challenge and thinks he can handle it. I think there is a legion of Dolphin fans that think he can, and there's a legion of Dolphin fans that long ago made up their minds that Tua Tagovailoa is not the guy. And whether he is, though, you're right. Let's end it on that. Whether Tua is the guy is the question of the season that is going to be answered one way or another.
Agree. And I think that would be the greatest success of this season beyond winning a Super Bowl, not just making the playoffs.
That you know Tua's your guy, that you find out for sure Tua's your guy?
Yes, because I think Dolphins fans, and this gets back to what you just said, that made Dolphins' ears bleed, that you evaluate the quarterback irrespective of the record, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, no. It's because every year with Ryan Tannehill was the same thing. And by the way, we figured out that he's the exact same guy in Tennessee that he was here. He's not going to win big. You're not going to win big.
But he has Derrick Henry, and he has, a solid defense.
A.J. Brown before they traded him. I guarantee you they're going to take a step back offensively this year, by the way, but that's a different story. I think with Tua, Stephen Ross isn't going to, Chris Greer isn't going to let this happen again, where you're year after year questioning, is Ryan Tannehill, is Tua Tagovailoa
7-8 years of that. Yeah, it's not happening.
This is it. This ain't going 7 or 8 years. This is it. We're going to know by the end of this season.
Agree. And that's the way we end the Miami Sports Pod. The training camp primer, we'll call it, because training camp does begin for the Miami Dolphins on Wednesday. We'll be there live. We'll have coverage. Clay and I'll be back next week, I'm sure, wrapping up the first week of training camp, the discussions of what we saw, what players are saying as football is back. Clay, we made it through the summer. Congratulations. Yay. Yay, football. Thanks for listening to the Miami Sports Pod.